Our speaker today is Auditor General Eugene DePasquale. Eugene was elected Pennsylvania's 51st Auditor General in the fall of 2012 and re-elected to a second term in 2016. The Auditor General is responsible for ensuring that all state money is spent in a legal and proper way. Eugene is one of 4 statewide elected officials serving in the executive branch, the other 3 being Attorney General, State Treasurer, and York's own Governor, Tom Wolf. Eugene, as Auditor General, has focused audits in areas that will improve the lives of all Pennsylvanians and deliver on his promise to be tough, to be fair, an independent fiscal watchdog for Pennsylvania taxpayers. So far, his audits have identified more than $600 million of misspent or potentially recoverable state funds. Some of the Auditor General's office's responsibilities are auditing state agencies, school districts, municipal pension funds, liquor stores, hospitals, corporate tax returns. Prior to his service as Auditor General, Eugene was a member of the State House of Representatives representing the greater York area, and Eugene still finds York his home, along with his wife and his 2 teenage kids. Eugene will focus in on what he has been experiencing in this important role serving the taxpayers of Pennsylvania. He'll discuss his recent released State of the Child Special Report, which found a wholesale breakdown in Pennsylvania's Children Youth Service system. Fellow Rotarian and Judge Chris Mangus sat with me the other week and told me the special report was completely dead on in its findings and suggestions that matched his personal experience as a judge within the family court. Eugene will also talk about his recently launched audits of the state workforce development systems, as well as other significant audits, along with his efforts to help tackle the opioid crisis, clear the backlog of untested rape kits, and make college more affordable for working class families. Fellow Rotarians and guests, please warmly welcome York's very own State Auditor General Eugene DePasquale.
Thanks, Mike. I felt a certain level of necessity to agree to Mike's request to speak. And this goes back to an issue we had. Pretty tough on Mike in June of last year. See, I coached the Shiloh American Legion baseball team. Mike coaches Glen Rock, and they had a 7-run lead in the last inning with 2 outs. And we ended up winning, and I think my son had actually the game-tying hit. And you've never seen anything like this in baseball. I think it was like 13 straight hits. It was unbelievable. And then Mike asked me to speak at Rotary, and I thought I at least owed him that much to agree to speak after that one, because it was a tough one. Although it wasn't that bad weather-wise, at least it wasn't one of those really hot summer days. Thank you for having me. I think I was last here about 2 years ago, and just a quick update. I was touting some of the things that we had done to make our own operations more efficient. As I say, it's tough to be the fiscal watchdog if you're not minding your own store. So when Barbara Hafer was the Auditor General in the mid-90s, the department had 906 people. And the last time I was here, we had 480. Well, we're now down to 455, and we are 30% more efficient per auditor than we were when I took office. And I'm now the only state agency that has eliminated our entire car fleet, and we are continually working to try to make ourselves more efficient, more effective. And the reason why that is simple. A, I think it's the right thing to do, and B, you have to practice what you preach. So if we're going to be critical of all these other agencies and school districts that we don't think are doing a good enough job, we have to do our best to try to be as effective, as efficient as we are. So I continue to be only the second statewide official in the country to post my own expenses online, and we're going to continue to work and work and work to try to be more efficient. In fact, last year, the legislature and the governor were so pleased with my work that we had the largest percentage cut in any agency. And the proposal to cut us by that percentage happened to come on the heels of me saying I should have the ability to audit the legislature. I don't know if they were connected in any way, but if the idea was to do that to get me to back off, they picked the wrong guy. So that's been what we've been doing since the last time I spoke here. Now, the audits that I think have we do 5,000 audits a year roughly, give or take, 100, 200 here or there, but it's roughly 5,000 a year. And I probably feel pretty confident saying that all of you have not read every single one. And don't worry, that's okay. You would be in a deep, deep, deep minority if you did. But we do certain audits that you're really getting into something. And our State of the Child report is one of them. Judge, Curley, I know your views on this and what you've expressed publicly and privately on this. 2 years ago, where this State of the Child report started, and this has direct impact here in York as well, we did an audit of what is known technically as Childline, but it's the Child Abuse Hotline. And we did an audit, and we found in 2015 alone, there were 58,000 unanswered phone calls at the Child Abuse Hotline. 58,000. Now, some of that is attributed to post-Sandusky, the laws were updated and there were a lot more mandated reporters. I mean, not to make light of it, but Mike and I, we can't have people working in our concession stand anymore at the Legion games without having the background check. So the amount of people needing the background check has been greatly increased. Understandable, but that's going to cause some challenges from the system, especially when there was no new staffing, no even moving people around in the department. The technology wasn't improved. So when we did that audit, who here has ever had a billing issue with Verizon or AT&T? When you're on hold, they can literally have 500,000 people on hold. The state had a program where if you were the 31st caller, you were just automatically dropped. So that 58,000 number doesn't even include the people that were dropped because the technology couldn't even keep you online. So we knew there was a major problem. That audit led to the legislature and the governor working together. I know that seems crazy to think legislature and governor working together, but in this instance they did. And now this error rate is from 25% now down to under 2% and getting closer and closer to zero. It will never be perfect, but that is what some of our audits can do to try to make something better. My next mission on this for children is the State of the Child report. In your county alone, caseworker turnover is 90%. Now, for those of you that don't know, and I don't mean this to be judgmental because most people don't, we are asking people right out of college, young men, young women, making $30,000 a year, to go into some of the toughest environments you can imagine. Places that, sometimes we think we're having a bad day at home. We cannot imagine what it's like in some of these areas for kids to go through. And it's not just York City. I mean, although in York City, 10% of our kids are functionally homeless. But this is all throughout Pennsylvania. And if you ask any police officer, the two most unpredictable things they will tell you in their job: traffic stops and domestic issues. And a cop will never go to a domestic without backup. Yet we are asking 23 and 24-year-olds, armed with a bachelor's degree and nothing else, to go into these environments. And again, there are exceptions to the rule, but most of them are not on Country Club Road, to go in there and make a decision about whether to get the child out of that home. And this is happening all over Pennsylvania, including the opioid epidemic. And as Auditor General, normally I am finding waste. This is one area where I think we need to do a better job of making investments up front. I think it's better for the kids, better morally, and I think it will also save us money on the back end. Because the failure rate of what is happening right now is leading to more illiteracy, more drug addiction, more alcoholism, and more incarceration. And it's simply not working. Now, it is not just about the pay of the workers, although we can certainly debate whether $30,000 is enough pay for that. But I would argue, because Cumberland County jacked up the pay, and they still have the same turnover. So there's clearly something else happening here. And we're now on, in a sense, a listening tour, talking about what we found and trying to hear solutions from the workers, from police, law enforcement, mental health advocates, and even drug and alcohol experts to try to see what we can do to turn this around. Because I don't think it's enough to just find out there's a problem. So I know soon I'm going to actually be having a hearing in York on this issue. York had the highest turnover rate in their case management system in the entire Commonwealth. We all know recently about the one child that was put with someone that they shouldn't have been put in, just to leave it at that. But the system is in a sense designed to fail. And we're going to need a complete overhaul of this system if we're going to appropriately protect our children and to do what I think all of us want to do, which is give every kid an equal opportunity of hope, and also try to reduce our prison population, because the average cost, whether you like it or not, whether you think it's too high or too low, but the average cost of public education per child per year, minus special education, is between $10,000 and $14,000 in Pennsylvania. The average cost of incarceration is $40,000 per inmate per year. So the more we can try to get kids a better education up front, again, it's never going to be perfect, the more we can reduce that incarceration on the back end. The other issue that I know that we have garnered a lot of attention on, because I think it, it touches people in really a significant way, and I'll tell you how, personally how I know this. We did an audit of untested rape kits. And what we found across Pennsylvania was stunning. That only 40% of police departments even knew there was a law requiring them to submit their untested rape kit data into, well, we have 3 labs, one in Pittsburgh, one in Philly, one with the state police, and that information gets put up into the FBI database. Why? Because you may not be shocked to hear this, but rapists aren't just going to stay in one area. In fact, 90 to 95% of rapists are serial rapists. So the story about the fraternity party where the guy does it one time and he feels bad about it, we should just sort of ignore that because it's just this one time this one guy did it. That's, I'm not going to say that never happens, but that's really a myth. Most of the people that do this violent, horrendous act, mostly to women, sometimes to men, have major problems. And they are violent by nature. Maybe not murder violent, but it's a violent act what they do. And we had 3,800 untested rape kits in Pennsylvania, just sitting on the shelves, not going through the testing. People walking the streets, where we had the data to know who they were and how to put them behind bars, and we weren't doing it. And 40% of the police department, I'm sorry, only 40% were compliant. 60% of the police departments didn't even know they were required to submit the data. So our audit uncovered that. And a result of that work, we now have under 1,800 that still need to be tested, but many more have gone through the system because now over 90% of police departments are complying with the law. Cracking down on this can protect anybody in this room's life, your kids, your grandkids, police officers, because when some of this information was submitted, they actually found it prevented somebody from trying to kill a cop in Cleveland. And this touches people in a personal way, because I was speaking at the Memorial Day event in York this past Memorial Day, and there was a guy who was pacing back and forth, and I could tell he wanted to talk to me. He was talking to a couple other folks, and he comes up and he goes, "Are you the Auditor General?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "My daughter was one of those people that they did that rape kit. They found the person that did it." So this impacts people's lives. And that's some of the things that we're able to do with the work of good people we have in our department. Some of the big ticket items that we're working on right now, we are working on a workforce development audit that recently started. The cost of higher education, I don't know how many of you are, my son is a senior in high school, and right now his 2 top choices are Miami of Florida and Wisconsin, and I know you're going to say the same thing my dad did. Does he know the weather's different in both locations? I'm like, "Dad, what do you want me to do?" I hope he knows. I mean, if he doesn't, he's probably not going to get accepted because they're both good schools, and if he's not able to handle that part of the application, I don't know how he gets into it. Wisconsin is, yes, colder than Miami, and Wisconsin does a pretty good job of trying to get you up there in the fall as opposed to winter. Miami does not have those same barriers to recruitment. And he plays baseball and band, although he not good enough to play for the Miami baseball team. I mean, you know, the Glen Rock Shiloh Legion baseball game's a little bit far away from Miami or Florida when it comes to baseball. But he wants to do the club ball and play in the and be in the band. And so we're meeting with the Miami of Florida band director, and he says, no matter where you are in the country, where you are, if we make a bowl game during the holiday break, the Christmas break, we fly you from your home to the bowl game. 130 kids in the band, 57 airports. Oh. We walk up and he goes, that's so nice of them to do that. I said, we're paying for that. Oh, they don't charge extra tuition. I said, no, it's part of the bill. I said, you think that 62 grand doesn't include a, you know, and so I get it, right? And I've seen these bills. They're not pretty. But part of this, you know, cost of higher education, you wonder, is what are we getting for this investment? And in Allegheny County alone, there are 10,000 job openings that they don't have the skills in the region to meet those jobs. There is, at the cracker plant in Beaver County, 1,000 welding jobs, and they only have 500 people in the region technically capable of doing that job. This is a job that you can have without a college degree, and if you're willing to work the overtime, make over 100 grand a year, and they can't fill the jobs. So, one of the things we're doing in our workforce development audit is, we're going to find out, are we doing a good job? And I can't prejudge the audit. Are we doing a good job of preparing our youth for the jobs that are going to actually exist? And so, when we are telling people, and we've audited the state system of higher education, and all of us have great respect for teachers. Many of us would not be here where we are today if it weren't for our teachers. But the myth that there's just going to be a plethora of teaching jobs. And so, now, York may be an exception. York and Lancaster may be an outlier. But you go into some regions of the state where the population is shrinking, and the idea that we're still producing the same number of teacher certificates in some of these regions where the population is shrinking, we are setting some of these young men and women up for failure because the jobs won't be there. And actually what we're doing in some of our state system schools is they do a great job of getting people ready to be teachers, then they have to go down south to actually be a teacher. Again, I'm not knocking that, other than these are our state-owned schools. So we have to find out if we're doing a good enough job to prepare our young people for the jobs that will actually exist in the future, and whether a 4-year liberal arts degree is necessary for so many people. And again, this is partly on us as parents too. There's this drive of, my kid's got to go to college, and sometimes we have to ask that question, is that really necessary in this certain circumstance? The other area where there's sort of broad agreement, when you take opioids. There's very few people that say, I don't care about opioid addiction. But one of the things that we have found out in our audits is that we're pumping money into rehab centers with no track record of actually reducing dependence. How long would any of your private businesses be in business if you were simply investing in a media strategy or a training strategy that had no record of success? I know, Ann, with the Convention and Visitors Bureau, when you do an ad, there's data behind why you're doing that ad. Sometimes it works better than others, but there's data behind it. We are literally spending tax dollars in rehab centers, and there's no data to find out if that center fixes anything. In fact, some of the data shows that the people need to keep going back because it's not helping them. And I don't need to tell anyone in here what drug addiction can do to a family, let alone the individual that's addicted, the kids, the loved ones, because there's very few of us that have been part of any family or social group that hasn't been impacted on this by some way, shape, or form. The final thing I want to talk to you about before, and I think we're going to take questions of it, is, and I know it may seem easy for me to say because I'm not the governor or in the legislature right now, and I would say this even certainly for DC, and that is, when did compromise become a bad word? I don't know when that happened. I didn't get the memo. You know, I'll try to be fair on this, because I know, you know, regardless of your politics, some people may think my side's doing it worse than the other, but you know, President Trump and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer struck a deal on DACA. I I saw that and I said, that's the way it's supposed to work. They probably gave him a little bit on border security. He gave them something on DACA. Probably both sides had a lot of merit to their issue. And these kids aren't going to get sent back, and we're going to make sure there's more border security to make sure the people coming in the United States actually should be allowed to come in. That seemed to make sense. Then all of a sudden, people wanted the primary, certain Republicans that were supporting that. And then Nancy Pelosi had her stage barged by immigrant proponents saying that the Democrats should only support a clean DACA bill and no negotiation. I'm sitting around going, man, there's some people going to lose a primary because they supported these kids, and some Democrats want to vote against their incumbent member because they didn't demand a clean DACA bill when they actually don't have the numbers to warrant that. But I'm just using that as one example. We all know all you got to do is turn on the news at night, realize how little cooperation there is. We're now in mid-October, and we still technically don't even have a state budget because there's no revenue package to pay for the spending plan. And I know we all, you gave us all a magic wand, we'd all have a different way to fix it, but the reality is, it's a constitutional requirement, and we're in mid-October, and nobody's shocked by it because that's just the culture of our political environment right now. So one of the things that I talk about when I'm speaking in a setting like this, and I've been doing it all over the state, is that we have to get back to where compromise isn't a dirty word. All of us, in our lives, every day, compromise. If you go out to dinner with somebody, where are you going? Okay, right? I mean, now that we have the magic clicker that you don't even need to go to the movie theater, who thinks that ended debate about what movie you're watching on Friday night, right? Because now when you have Vudu or Netflix, you don't just have the 8 choices at West Manchester. Now you have every movie that in the history of the universe. And for me, look, if you don't want to watch Star Wars, that's your problem, not mine. But the reality is, I mean, now my son and daughter, they have like every movie to fight over, not just the 8 that are at the theater. So you got to compromise. I mean, that's what we all do. And I don't mean it to make light of it. It's meant to point out we all do this every day. So please, when you're contacting your elected official, I think there's 2 things to do. And you should do this with me or anybody. No, after I'm willing to compromise too. But I think you should fully state your principles and what you believe should happen. But also when they say, hey, I get that, but I may need a little flexibility to get, because there's sort of the overall goal and sometimes the tactics to get there. And if your goal is having a better business climate, then it's probably a little bit of give and take. And so, let's see, one of the things I want to stress is we got to get back to where compromise is not a dirty word. Most people in your county, I'm guessing probably a pretty big chunk that were voting in, thought Ronald Reagan did a pretty good job. He was overwhelmingly reelected. And he had a Democratic Congress at the House level his entire 8 years, and the Democrats had the Senate the last couple. And he was able to get a pretty big chunk of his agenda through, and a lot of that was through negotiation. That's one of the, I realize when you're selling your book, New York Times bestseller list isn't with how I compromised. I mean, I get that, right? I mean, the people that sell a lot of books are how the other side's evil and I'm the greatest. I mean, I get that. But if we're actually going to get something done, we got to get back to where we're listening to each other, working together, and compromising. And that's something I believe strongly in, and I'm going to keep fighting for what I can until either the Constitution or the voters have had enough of me. So thank you very much for having me. Look forward to answering any questions. Joe? I don't know, does anyone have a mic, or I can repeat the question?
I think I can make it loud enough. So on NPR this morning, Eugene, there was a story on Amazon, and then they broadened it to say that the contestants for Amazon are kind of putting a light on this issue of states and cities throwing money at companies to move there. Has your group ever done an analysis in PA of whether those promised jobs happen, and how many people come in, take the money, and then in a fairly short fuse head out of town, and how Pennsylvania, are we getting true value for the money we put into those efforts?
Joe, thanks for the question. I know I didn't plant that one. Yeah, we did do an audit of that. First of all, the question is, basically overall is, Amazon is basically forcing all these states to compete with tax dollars. Let's be blunt about this. Tax dollars or tax credits or tax breaks. So that means our tax dollars to pick where they're going to go. And has there ever been an analysis done on that in PA to find out how effective it is, et cetera, with the jobs? Is that an accurate? Yeah. We did do an audit of that about 2 years ago, and we found out, not shockingly, that the promised jobs, even in the short term, aren't true, let alone the long term. And one of the things that we found pretty outrageous was when a company says they're going to create, let's just make up the number, 100 jobs, and the state gives a grant based on that 100. The only requirement prior to my audit that they were creating those 100 jobs was the CEO or some management person in the company signing a piece of paper going, yes, I created those jobs, with no verification of payroll data or anything. Now, some in here will say, and I understand this, there are private businesses that shouldn't have to hand over the payroll data, which my response is, that is true up until you're accepting public money. I mean, I get it. If you're running a pizza shop or something, you're not asking for public money or a technology, and you're not, I mean, yeah, I'm not talking about going through the permitting process. I'm talking about you're asking for the taxpayers to subsidize at least a part of your business. I think we have the right to then make sure those jobs are promised, and more so than just on day one, but they're kept. So Joe, to answer the question, and I'm going to get to an overarching point at the end, we weren't, we now are, but I'm still concerned that long term we keep them, because there's no requirement beyond a couple of years that they have to pay that back. The state needs to have better clawback provisions, so when the companies don't meet their projections, we can get some of that money back. But there's a broader question. Is this even a way to do economic development in the United States? And I personally believe that it'd be great if it went away. If the federal government said, we're done. States, you cannot use your tax dollars to steal company from state A to state B. I think Pennsylvania, we'd be in a pretty good advantage on that, because the one thing we don't have that some of these southern states have is an enormous amount of land where they build, highway and exit and just out in the middle of nowhere, and they give them the land for free. That's a tough thing for the industrial Northeast and Midwest to compete with. I think our workforce is second to none. I do think our tax climate needs to be a little better, not to be funny, but, and I do think our education system, as imperfect it is, will knock the socks out of so many of these other states. And I think our higher ed system, not just the York Colleges of the world and the Franklin and Marshalls at the small liberal arts school, but Pitt, Penn State, Temple, are as good as they get from the public-private partnership. And certainly we have the Lehighs of the world, the Bucknells, and even Penn, which is an Ivy League school. So I think from the educational system, we win that fight too. But I think the federal government should be stepping in and saying, we're not going to allow the taxpayers in one state to subsidize this fight anymore. I do think, though, once states are allowed to do it, it's tough to say we're going to get out of the game. But I do think that at a minimum, we can get better at, and we are getting better at, making sure the jobs that are promised are actually created. But we need to get better on the clawback provision, so if they don't meet it, we get that money back. But I think overall, I think we'd be in a better country today if we just weren't doing this at all, and forcing states to compete on their tax climate, their workforce, and their infrastructure. I think Pennsylvania would be in a pretty good position to win on that, but that's not the reality right now. Hopefully that answers the question.
Two more quick ones.
Yeah, two more. So
I received a bachelor's and master's degree in the performing arts, and I'm lucky enough to have a job in that field. Having said that, though, I am in complete agreement and support of your concerns that we are encouraging generations of young people to go to school for jobs that may not exist in the future. And so I am in complete support of that. So with that being said, what do you think about the Commonwealth's investment in higher education? And is it subsidizing too many of the wrong things, or in general is spending too much money in that area?
I think the answer to that is yes. We did an audit of the state system of higher education, and we found, just for example, the same program practically exists at every state-owned university. Okay, that doesn't mean the program doesn't have merit. I just don't know if we need to have it at every single campus. I think you can maybe pick 2 or 3 and work it that way, and sometimes I say this, it comes off as me being flip, but there's this thing called, a plane and a car now. You don't need to have the same campus at every single part of Pennsylvania. Like, kids that grow up in Pittsburgh actually can go to Westchester and vice versa. Like, in the old days, like, everyone from Indiana area went to IUP. Like, those days are obviously gone now. In fact, the kids are clamoring to get away from their parents, and I sort of somehow will get that, right? But I do think that we are blowing taxpayer money at this in the number of similar course offerings at each of our campuses, I think reflects that. There's 2 other areas that I'm pretty sure this is correct. Penn State, and I don't mean this to pick on them because their own people told me this. For them to come up with a new program to meet the needs of soon-to-be graduates takes them 5 years. So by the time they start it, by the time that's actually running, a whole class is gone. That's crazy. I don't mean, I would be shocked if Pitt and Temple aren't the same. But I'm just telling, that's what it's like at these bigger schools. Thaddeus Stevens, right down the street. How many people know that Thaddeus Stevens' job placement rate is better than Penn? Yeah, better than Penn. 100%. So, one of the things we need to do is we need to take Thaddeus Stevens, have one of them in the northeast, one in the southeast, one in the northwest, one in the southwest, along with what we have here. And again, it's not for everybody. I'm going to say this. Thaddeus Stevens is not for everybody, but their job placement rate is 100%. Penn is not 100%. And regardless of where any of us went to college, Penn's pretty good, and they're not 100%. And Thaddeus Stevens is. So that means that, at a minimum, we have to really revisit this whole issue. I think there was one in the back. Yeah.
Very quick.
Yeah, I got to be quick. I think the quick is not on you, it's on me.
I'd like to thank you for your turnabout social work. I do believe, if I read correctly in the newspaper, that York has actually chosen to pay these kids, college young people, less than what the going rate is in the state. Is that correct, and has that been addressed?
That is correct. I'm not sure it's been addressed yet, but when I have my hearing down here, because I'm going to have them all over the state. I was in Johnstown yesterday. I know we're working to schedule the York one. That will be specific, and specifically not just on the pay, but the 90% turnover. I don't want to get into right now the semantics of whether it's 27 or 32 or 36 is the better salary. I think we have to get at, for starters, why is the York turnover rate the highest in the state? Then I think some of the other discussions flow from that, but yes, that is accurate. I think one more if I'm super quick. Super quick.
You talked about right now we don't have a state budget. I know from being up in Harrisburg a couple of weeks ago that the definition of compromise right now is you do everything my way.
Right.
We're good with
Right,
it.
right.
Not too long ago, I believe there was a bipartisan budget put together that didn't go through. Can you explain the whys and where we're at right now?
Yeah, and I know I need to be quick, but here's kind of what happens with this. Moderates in both parties get together, they form this compromise, and then the interest groups on the far left and far right come out and immediately start to attack them. In fact, you have people inside the caucuses on both sides of the spectrum that begin shooting information before it's even shared with the public on just broad discussions. Like a member goes to the microphone in caucus and says, maybe I can support this tax increase if we do welfare reform. And then what happens is somebody in that room now texts that to the radio station, the talk radio host in that area who's maybe known as conservative, and goes, Joe's selling us out on taxes. And before you know it, before he even gets to his computer, he's got 150 emails of outraged citizens, and he doesn't even know what they're talking about, finds out one of his own members ratted him out. That's what happens. And by the way, I want to be fair, it goes both ways. I got one more hand up there.
I'm Chris Mangus.
Yeah.
I'm judge here in York County. I do about 50% of what I do is child dependency. Your 82-page report was right on target. I came out and started to read it, couldn't put it down. My question to you is, what's being done with the administrative side to get rid of some of the regulations and the ridiculous forms? What's being done on the legislative side to get more funding?
Thanks, Judge, and thank you for, I know some of the kind words that got back to me on, because I know we couldn't have ex parte, but I appreciate those. Here's the simple answer. I believe that if you wait for other people to do it, it's never going to happen. So that's why I'm traveling around the state, and then I'm going to come out with my own proposed solution in the spring of next year. And then I'm going to be fighting tooth and nail with the legislature and administration to try to get at least some of that through.